Good morning YouTube! Today I have a super exciting video for you all. So I'm going to keep this introduction short and sweet. As a lot of you may know, last weekend was Yalc. So I had the opportunity to talk to a whole bunch of authors and I thought I'd do something for my channel, something for you guys, whilst I was there. So I have a couple of things that I want to say first. The first thing is that I totally recommend you turning on closed captions. I've closed captioned the entire video. Basically, as this was filmed at Yalc, it's a convention, there is a lot of background noise at times, so the best way to make sure you don't miss out on a single word is to turn on closed captions. Secondly, in the description you will find timestamps, so if you're just looking for a specific author, you can head down there, search down the list and click them, or even if you're just curious as to who is actually in this video, there are 65 of them, so you can check them all out in the description below. Next, please do feel free to leave ideas in the comments if there's anything you'd love me to ask authors in the future, as I'm totally open to the idea of doing some more of these videos. And then whilst I was going around talking to all of these authors, I did actually manage to pick up a whole ton of signed bookish swag, so I'm going to be running 3 giveaways, one every weekend for the rest of August. Each one will run for a week. There's signed stuff from over 30 authors, so please do stick around on my channel if you're interested in winning some of that. And then last but not least, I just want to say a huge thank you to Yalc, the convention, and the authors for being just so amazing, having such inspirational words for us all, and yeah, just being so awesome getting involved in this video. So yeah, I asked 65 authors at Yalc for one piece of advice for aspiring writers, and here's what they said.
Hello, my name is Aaronovitch, I'm a writer, and here's my best piece of advice to anyone who's trying to be a writer. Finish what you start. If you don't think you can finish a novel, start a short story. That way it's much less to finish. The whole thing is, what you can really tell the difference between someone who's going to write and someone who isn't going to write is the writer is the one that finishes. You must finish the work. It doesn't matter if it takes you 6 weeks, 12 years, or a century and a half, presumably through other lives, then you must finish what you start.
I'm Sophia Bennett, and I'm the author of Love Songs, among other things, so that's this one here. And my piece of writing advice is something that I have stolen from Neil Gaiman, and it's about the capacity to steal things from, and it is to finish things. So whatever you're working on now, just slave your way through it to the end, and you'll reach some hard moments, and everybody does. But it's really important to practice finishing things, and then you'll have a wonderful body to look back on. So good luck.
My one piece of advice for aspiring writers would be, don't be afraid to write from the heart as well as the head, and write with passion and write about the things you care about.
Hi, I'm Bourne. I'm the author of the Spinster Club trilogy, and my piece of advice to anyone writing is really, really basic. Just read a lot and write a lot. Honestly, that changes everything.
One piece of advice I'd give was going to be what Anthony said, but I can't use that anymore. So I would say just keep writing. Just every time you write, you get better and better and better. So just keep going. Don't be disheartened. Just keep doing it, and one day you'll have a book, and then you can publish it, and everything will be
I'm Melvin, and my one piece of advice to you is just don't stop. You'll get there in the end.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm the author of Other Girl and Wonder Boy, and my advice for any aspiring writers is to read everything. Everything. You hate it, read it. You love it, read it. All the stuff in between, read it. Know what you're talking about and just enjoy books.
Hi, I'm Katy. I'm the author of Love Lies and Lemon Pies and Secret Schemes and Sewing Machine. My one piece of writing advice, I would say, write deeper, write down into your innermost feelings. Go deeper and harder than you think you can. Make it really difficult for your characters, and write the stuff that makes you think, oh, I can't do that, because that's going to be your best stuff.
Hey, I'm Cargill, and I cope with waiting to come back with my mom. And so I would say that my biggest piece of advice for aspiring writers is to write what you know. So like, we wrote Waiting to Come Back partially based on my experiences doing acting and like the really like weird, humiliating stuff that happened to me. But I would say that even if you're writing about kind of aliens on like another planet in like a millennium, like you've still got to make those aliens like relatable in a weird way. So I think look at your friends, you know, they're a creepy stalker, like find the weird things that they do and put that into your character.
Yeah, and I would say that my biggest piece of advice is that to allow yourself not to be perfect first time or even second time or even third time, because we certainly had to do so many drafts and so many edits, and you're never going to get it right first time, so don't give up.
Sophie Croft, and I'm the author of Indigo's Dragon, which is an MGYA fantasy adventure. And my one piece of advice for aspiring writers would be to have patience and to take time writing your book and make it the very best that it can be.
Hi, I'm Crossan and I'm the author of One, and my advice for aspiring authors would be to be creative, because it is part of our humanity to be creative, and there is a self-help person called Brené Brown who says that unchecked creativity is not benign, which means it makes you sick. So just do it. My only piece of advice is just to do it, because it's part of your humanity to be creative.
Hi, I'm Mintie and I am the author of Storm Sisters, and my advice is failure or rejection, it's part of it, and don't worry about it, just write.
My advice is to try and write a set amount of words every day and keep going. It doesn't matter if it's rubbish, it will be rubbish, it should be rubbish, you can always edit it.
Hi, I'm Ben Davis, author of the Private Blog of Joe Cowley series. The best piece of advice I think of for any writers is to not be too good, because you'll put me out of a job. But mainly just to keep writing, just keep writing all the time, whenever you get a chance, and honing and refining. If you've got someone who can read it for you and give you a second opinion on it, give it put a pair of eyes on it, that's really good as well. But mainly the best advice, and I bet everyone else said this as well, is just write. That's it. Cheers.
Hello, my name's Juno Dawson. I'm the author of All of the Above and various others. My one piece of writing advice is ignore literally every and all writing advice and just focus on telling the best story that you can. Read widely. That's it.
I'm Kat Doyle, author of Vendetta Inferno and the forthcoming Mafiosa and Blood for Blood trilogy, and my advice is, I've just given a workshop on how film can inspire writing. So my advice is, think of the moments in film that have inspired you the most and ask yourself why you connected to them the way you did, what emotions they made you feel and how they made you feel that way, and then try and reinstill that in your own work with your own characters.
Okay, so the best advice I would give to an aspiring writer would be to get your first draft done by hook or crook, no matter how long it takes, no matter how painful the process. I think as soon as you've got that first draft in place, that's your starting point, and then from there it's all sort of downhill, easy ride. And so, yeah, that's the one thing I always try and do as a writer, get the first draft out, and then once you've got that down, you're off with it.
I would say just don't start. It took me about 15 years to get published. So although this is my first published book, it's actually not finished. So just keep going. That's the only difference between a piece of cake and a bullet and learning craft.
My piece of advice for aspiring writers is read as much as you can, as much and as widely as you can, because reading other people's work makes you better writing.
Hello, I'm Emerald Fennell, the author of Monsters, and my bit of advice is just write. That sounds so stupid, but write anything, it doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter where it is, it doesn't matter if it's a poem, blog, book, it could be a graphic novel, it could just be a rude letter to, I don't know who, someone. But just the thing of getting it down, and I think, and there's a writer, I can't remember who it is, but someone amazing said black on white. Just that thing of getting it down. Because I've written stuff that is just so terrible that I hope no one ever finds, but it's always led to something else, something that I'm really proud of. And so just throw everything at it, and don't be embarrassed and don't be coy, just have a go.
Hi, I'm Natalie Flynn, author of The Deepest Cut. My one piece of advice for an aspiring author is just to never give up. It took me 10 years to get published, and the only difference between me and you now is time. So just keep going, keep submitting, keep sending it out, keep practicing, keep rewriting, just don't give up, and soon enough you'll be holding your own.
I'm Sarah Gavat, author of The Territory. So yeah, my advice would be just have a go, start writing, and if you can't think of anything to write, you're probably writing the wrong book. So then have a go at writing something else, and just have a go.
Hi, this is Michael Grant. So a couple quick things to say. There is no correct way to write a book. There's only the way that you write it, and you have to figure that out on your own if you want to write a book. You're going to read books telling you how to do it, and sometimes they're useful. I like Stephen King's book on writing. But basically, you're going to figure this out on your own, and however it works for you is good. If you've got whatever you have to do to get to the point where you put those 3 hash marks at the end of the book and you're done, you do whatever you have to do. So do it your way, figure it out, and enjoy it.
Hi there, I'm Sally Green, the author of the Half Bad series. My one piece of advice, well, to be honest, there's so much advice I could give you, but I think one thing that I really pleased that I did was find some fellow writers who I could work with and share my work with, and also learn to look at their work and criticise them nicely and give them feedback and try and work out why some parts of a story went well and some parts didn't go so well. And so it really helped me, and I hope it helps you. Enjoy your writing.
Hi, my name's Julia Gray, and I've written a book which is a little bit supernatural, a little bit satirical, called The Other Life, published by Anderson Press. And my advice would be for aspiring writers is to be consistent. So try, if you can, to do a little bit every day, or as many days of the week as you can, because writing is like a muscle, and the more you exercise that muscle, the easier it will get. And there are always going to be moments where you feel very negative about what you're doing, and if you have a process whereby you know you're going to sit down in your chair and get to work, it can just make it easier to overcome those moments of negativity. So good luck with everything that you're working on.
I'm Alwyn Hamilton, author of Rebel of the Sands, and my one advice for aspiring authors is write something that is unique to you. Don't think of it as being creative, because then you'll freeze up. Think of it as writing something that only you could write, which means exactly the same thing as be creative, but just makes you think about who you are as a person and what you like and what you enjoy, and integrate all that into your book rather than think of it as like, think of the most creative thing you would ever think of. And that's my best piece of advice for young writers.
I'm Frances Hardinge. My advice to young writers would be stubborn. The best piece of advice I was given was that when you get rejection letters or rejection notes, treat them as trophies. The more you have, the better you're doing, the closer you are to your goal, and it's evidence that you are taking your craft seriously. Good luck.
Put down your mobile phone just for a bit, look around you and observe people, observe life, and use it in your writing.
I'm Lauren James, and I'm the author of the Next Together series, and my piece of advice for aspiring authors is to always write about zombie cats, by which I mean always write about the thing which you're passionate about, and don't try and write to trends, or like writing the next Hunger Games or Divergent dystopian novel. Write about the weird, quirky thing you're obsessed with, because someone else out there will be just as obsessed with it as you are, even if it's zombie cats.
My name is Rosalind Yana, and I'm the author of Homes of Being Teenage. And my piece of advice would be enter writing competitions. There are loads of fantastic contests out there for young people, and for me that was how I had this first moment of other people going, you're good, keep at it, you're onto something.
My name's Pete Cullu, I'm the author of Zombie 11, The Silent Striker, and Being Me, and my one piece of advice to aspiring writers is write what you fear. If you fear something, if you're afraid of something, if you're troubled by something, that's probably the best place to write from, because in writing it, you will work through it, and you may find yourself writing something that surprises even you.
So my piece of advice to aspiring authors is to write a book that you would love to read yourself. Just picture that book, and that's the book you want to read.
Hi, I'm Damien Knight, and I've got a Pages of Time. I have one piece of advice for aspiring writers. To try and do an outline before you start writing. Before I finished my first book, I had some several attempts that didn't quite see it through to the full manuscript. And then I was writing about Pam, and I found that by doing outlines that it shouldn't be rigid, it should be something that you can alter as you go, as new things come to you. But just having the scaffolding in place really helps just to know where you're going.
Hi, my name's Dawn Kurtigich. I wrote The Dead House and The Creeper Man, and I'm giving some aspiring writers some advice. The first thing I want to say is, firstly, congratulations for persevering. Keep going. Do the stubborn thing and never quit. Never stop improving and never stop trying. You will get there. Second thing I would say is, don't rush. Make sure that your book is the best it can be. Take the time you need to get it right.
so that when you query, you have the best shot of getting your perfect agent.
Okay, so I'm Richard Katy, screenwriter turned novelist. And the one piece of advice I'd give is write about an idea that you absolutely love. You want to lose yourself in for months and months and months. You do that, go for it.
My advice would be write what you feel compelled to write and not what you feel like you're supposed to write.
That's good advice. Yeah. I should really listen to it. My advice would be just let yourself fail repeatedly and don't put pressure to be perfect the first time because it is never, ever perfect the first time. It'd be nice if it were, but never.
Yes.
I think my advice for aspiring authors is you've got to keep going, don't be hard about this, and keep going until you write the two best words of the novel, which is the end.
My piece of advice for aspiring authors is no matter what you're writing about, be it skeleton detectives or demons or zombies or space aliens or it's a love story or a historical, no matter what you're writing about, you have to include a bit of yourself into it. You have to slice off a bit of your own soul and put it in those pages. Because I don't care what you write about, what genre, unless you connect with your audience, it means nothing. So if you are honest, if you are brutally honest, one moment of pure honesty is all you need to get the audience to connect with your characters. One moment of honesty that happened to you, that you have experienced, that other people can share and recognize, that will resonate. That's what you need. That's how you make books real.
I would say that my advice to anybody that wants to write is that you do some of your best work when you're not actually writing. So when I'm walking my dog or when I'm sort of like having a swim is when I'm just thinking really hard about kind of what I want to write or the scene that I'm going to go home and do. So I just think it's really sort of important to actually get away from your desk, get away from the tyranny of the blank screen and actually write in your head before you ever pick up a pen or like put your fingers on the keyboard.
Hi, my name's Taran, author of Aaronovitch, and my one piece of advice for you is finish what you start. It's so easy to start a new book, get into it, and then you hit a bit of a block and you stop writing. And I think it's so important to finish a book. A book that's finished is worth 1,000 times more than a half-finished book. So that's my one piece of advice.
Hello, this is Simon. I would say two things. One, keep reading. Read as much stuff as you possibly can, a wide variety of things, stuff that's outside your comfort zone. Just keep reading and getting more stimulation. And by one book, it would be On Writing by Stephen King.
Yeah, exactly.
Read that and you will be inspired. You'll finish the last book and then you'll stop.
Hi there, I'm Anna Matharu. I'm the author of Crossan and Red Witch. If I had to give you one piece of advice about writing, I think it's a really, really straightforward piece of advice, but it's just basically write loads. So just do it a lot, write as many different types of things as you can. So you might want to write narrative, or you might want to write poetry, or a short story, or just write. It doesn't have to be anything in particular, but the best thing to do is just to get loads of words on the page and keep going and improve all the time.
Hello, my name is Cargill and I wrote The Girl Levithan Stars, which is a magical realist adventure story about mapping and storytelling. And if I had one piece of advice for an aspiring author, it would be farm the seed. The book is not going to write itself, and sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's boring, but just keep going, keep that initial inspiration that you had in your head, and just write until you get to the end, and then make it better.
Always write a book you want to read yourself. You should be amazed at how many people don't. They write for other people or the market, but it's the books you write for yourself that people want to read. I swear to God, 100% true. So write a book you want to read.
My name is Louise O'Neill and I'm the author of Only Ever Yours and Asking For It. And my advice is probably a little bit weird because it's to do with creative visualization. My father was really into sports psychology and he used to tell me that if you couldn't see it and you couldn't believe it, then you wouldn't achieve it. So I read this book called Creative Visualization by Shakti Goel, and it actually changed my life. And I think that it's a really useful tool because as an author, you face rejection and it can be quite discouraging. And I think it's important to always have your end goal in sight. So yeah, I would recommend reading that book. And when you're all then making as much money as J.K. Rowling, you can thank me personally.
My advice to aspiring authors is write the book you want to read.
Hi, I'm Annabelle Picture, and my advice for
would be to free yourself from perfection. This is something that I really struggle with, and I think it holds a lot of people back. We all start off with an idea and we're really excited and we get going, and after about 5 minutes, like this voice in your head sets in and tells you that it's good enough, or that no one's going to like it, no one's ever really appreciated. And I think it's about turning that voice off in your head and just allowing yourself to write and trusting that even if it feels difficult and feels imperfect, you might still have something in the story. And force yourself to get to the end, even though you have all that kind of crumbling insecurity about it. And you might surprise yourself if you don't listen to that voice in your head.
Hi, my name's Laura Power. I'm the author of Airborne and Young Adult Fantasy Novels. My one piece of advice to all you writers out there would be to always believe in your story and always be open to inspiration from everywhere and anywhere. Good luck.
So, my piece of advice is only write because you enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it, you won't want to do it. And you only do more writing if you want to do it. So, the thing is, don't feel pressured, never feel like you have to write, never feel guilty for not writing. Just do it because you love it.
Hello, I'm Philip Reeve. I'm the author of Railhead. My advice for young writers would be, or old writers, or any writers, would be read. Read everything you can. Read all the time. And then when you're not reading, write all the time. Write loads and loads and loads and loads and throw most of it away. And then rewrite the good bits. And eventually, if you keep persisting at that, you end up with a book.
Hello, I'm Harriet Roach-Hapgood. I'm the author of The Square Ridge of Summer. If I have a piece of advice for any writers, it is... it would be write the book that you want to write and just turn off all of the noise. So don't look at the internet, don't look at the book that's just come out that sounds a bit like yours or the thing that you think is coming out. It doesn't matter if someone has the same story as you, the execution might be different, so just stick to what you can do.
I'm Chris Russell, I'm the author of Songs About a Girl, which just came out. Someone's trying to distract me, but I'm not going to allow them to. Come on, pro. So the book came out a couple of days ago, and my advice for aspiring writers would be always know what your next idea is. Because I originally got my agent for a different book, not Songs About a Girl, but I had the idea for Songs About a Girl in the back of my head. And when I met my agent, he said, your first book is good, but it's going to be difficult to sell. Where are you going next? And I said, I've got this idea for a book about a boy band. And I was kind of signed really on the basis that the second book is much better than the first. So I would say always know where you're heading next. Hope that helps.
Hi, I'm Lucy Saxon, the author of the Teller series, and my advice for aspiring writers is don't be afraid to be bad at it first, because everyone starts out bad, and the only way that you get better is through practice.
Hi, so I'm at Yalc this year, and I'm Alex Scarrow, author of Remade, and also Time Rider series, you may have heard of it. Yeah, look, I want to give you some advice on writing. I know some of you out there wanted to get into writing. This is a top tip I give when I go into schools and do workshops. It's a really simple one, but if you think about it, it makes a hell of a lot of sense. And it's this. When you've got an idea you really, really want to write, the very, very first thing I suggest you do is write the last chapter. Actually, it envisages the whole chapter so you know exactly how the story ends. Then when you go back to the beginning, your whole thing has a direction of travel. And you're so much more likely to finish it. I find so many writers start, they go, yeah, so cool, reach chapter 5, run out of steam. And if they've got an ending in mind, it takes them right the way to the end. There you go. Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
One piece of advice I have for writers is just to be brave. I think the first thing you have to realize is that you have to put yourself out there, and rejection is part of the process, and it's kind of a part that you should embrace because it never goes away. It's at all stages, and so yeah, just make sure that you want it more than you're afraid of it.
I'm Taran Shan, I'm the author of the zombie books. And my piece of advice is very obvious, but it can never be stated enough. Write. You want to be a writer, you've got to write. There's no magic involved. The more you write, the more you learn, and the better you get. You write bad stories, you learn from mistakes, and you write something better next time around. Just keep on writing, and you'll get there.
Hi, I'm Samantha Shannon, I'm the author of The Bourne season, and my main piece of advice to aspiring writers is to experiment, mix genres, and do whatever you like. Never think that something is too weird to turn into a novel.
My name's Josephine. I'm a YA author of 5 books, and if I could give you one piece of advice,
if you're an aspiring writer, it is to follow your dreams, because you never know which dreams will come true. And I didn't get published for a really long time, and I kept trying and trying and trying, and eventually my dream came true. So don't give up, because if you give up, you've got nothing. So keep going and you'll get there.
Hi, my name is Matthew Stewart. I'm the author of Levithan, and my strongest piece of advice for aspiring writers is to learn to love failure and to accept that things that you do may not work, but that is a brilliant, positive part of the process of working towards the thing that will work. And all the abandoned books and all the things that you've cut out of your manuscript will end up somewhere in a little magical shed in your head, and you can go there and tinker and eventually build something beautiful that's the thing that will lead you to publication.
I'm Maggie Stiefvater, the author of The Raven Cycle and the Shiver Trilogy, and I am giving you one piece of advice for aspiring writers. And the biggest piece of advice that I can give you is that if you're going to be in any creative profession, you should turn all of the no's that you hear, and you'll get a lot of them, into not yet instead. So I, for instance, tried to become a music major, an art major, and a creative writing major in college, and each one of those places turned me down, and they said no. And so if I'd taken any of those no's, I could have been doing something very boring right now instead of standing looking at this camera. And so instead, if you assume that those no's mean not yet, that means you just have to try harder and look more impressive the next time. And so when you come into their office and say, "Can I do this?" they say, "Well, clearly you can." So that's my piece of advice for all aspiring writers. All of your no's are not yet's.
My name is Chris Vick. I'm the author of this Southwest Cornwall-based dark romance book, YA. Is that enough of a summary for you? And you want a piece of advice, right, for aspiring authors? I would say keep it relatively simple. Work out, the best advice I ever had was work out what you want to say and say it as clearly as possible.
Hi, my name is Lee Weatherby, and I've been asked to give tips to writers just starting out. I guess everyone has heard the advice that you should read a lot, so of course I'm saying that. But I think what I would also say is that you should write with passion. Write what you find absolutely fascinating. Think about the world that you would love to read about, and that's what you should be writing.
I would say, it's kind of obvious, but write. So as much as you can. I would say keep a diary, even though I know people worry that people will find your diary and read it, but what I do now, I kept a paper diary when I was younger, but now I email myself. So I have this email account. No one knows what the email account is, the password, and I just send myself emails, and it's a really good way of just getting used to expressing yourself using words, and a good way also of getting your stuff out of your system, and then you can go and write a story instead. So I would say keep a diary. It's just a really good way of just honing your craft and practicing. Because writing's like anything. If you want to be an amazing violinist or a ballet dancer, you have to practice, and writing's the same, and a diary is just a great way of getting that practice.